Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. Today the topic of our show is how China's Belt and Road Initiative benefits the Middle East. The Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, better known as the Belt and Road Initiative, is a development strategy proposed by the Chinese President Xi Jinping that focuses upon connectivity and regional cooperation. It is an idea, it's the next big thing. To discuss this topic, we are with us today Hussein Askary. He is the Southwest Asia Coordinator for the Schiller Institute. He's also the Arabic editor of the weekly magazine Executive Intelligence Review. And lastly, he is the chairman of the Swedish European Labour Party. Welcome to our show, Hussein Askary. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you, Zain Khan. It's a great pleasure for me to be on this show.
Let's get to the first question. Would you briefly describe the One Belt, One Road initiative? What is it?
Yeah, well, the One Belt, One Road, or what is now called the Belt and Road Initiative, it's something which was announced by the current president of China, President Xi Jinping, in 2013. And it refers to, first, the belt is the economic belt of the new Silk Road, which is a land-based transport corridor which extends from eastern China through western China, Central Asia, Iran, Turkey, and further to Europe. The road is the 21st Century Maritime Road, and that's an extension from the South China Sea. It's a sea lane, which includes many ports, of course, and it goes through the Indian Ocean, to the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Suez Canal, and further to Europe. Now, the Belt and Road is not a new thing. It's an extension of another Chinese initiative, which was called the New Silk Road, which was adopted by the Chinese government in 1996 to revive the ancient Silk Road, which we know was the connection between East and West for trade. But this time it's more than trade. What has emerged in the Belt and Road Initiative is that China's development process in the last 30 years have produced enormous technological capabilities and industrial capabilities, and of course enormous financial resources for China. And China wants to use this and spread the model internationally, both to develop other regions of the world, but also to open markets for Chinese products and also technologies. The Chinese, in the last 20 years, have built the world's most fascinating, the largest high-speed railway network ever built by humankind in China, which is 20,000 kilometers long. This is much more than all what Europe have done in the last 50 years. Of course, in the United States, there is no high-speed railway. China has been building new cities, have been building some of the world's largest water transfer projects, like the South-North Water Transfer Project. It's a whole new river going north to the dry areas of China. They have built the world's largest dam, the Three Gorges Dam, and building many other water projects. So in that process of development, in which China took 700 million people, of its own people, out of poverty, now this model can be replicated around the world. And as we know, that in the West generally, Europe and the United States have had a long period of economic stagnation. We had the catastrophic financial crisis of 2008. Productivity is down in Europe and the United States, and this has affected the whole world. So the Belt and Road Initiative is actually reviving the whole world economy, but it's being spearheaded by China.
Could you please explain to our viewers how many countries are directly part of this gigantic Chinese project?
Well, until in the earlier last year, China organized the Belt and Road Forum and invited the many heads of states and the representatives of more than 100 countries. But nations that have connected themselves to the Belt and Road Initiative are about 70 nations now in 3 continents, which include, Asia, Europe, and Africa. But the issue is not, it's not like a membership. China has said that it's not going to force this on any nation. It will open the door for cooperation with any nation that wants to participate in this project. It's a concept, it's an idea, but it's being concretely built by nations who are willing to cooperate with China and utilize China's economic, technological, and financial power, which otherwise is not available from any other source, to build their own economies and build and connect their own national economy to the global economy. In the same time, this facilitates global trade. So now we have had trains going from China through the Russian railway system and the Trans-Siberian railway system all the way to Western Europe, to Germany, transporting machines, technologies, trade, and other items. So, and now also we have an extension of the Silk Road to the so-called Middle East. I don't prefer the term the Middle East because it's part of the old British imperialist. I call it Southwest Asia. Like Iran, for example, is connected, Turkey is connected, and soon we will see Iraq and Syria being connected, and the rest of the Gulf countries, either through the maritime Silk Road by the sea, like Dubai is already connected, we'll have Oman being connected, and so on. But now it's also extending into Africa, which is one of the most fascinating developments we have had. Now, just to inform you about myself and the Schiller Institute, we have actually developed this idea since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, who's he's an economist and a thinker, an American economist and thinker, and his wife Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who's a German political leader, and she also founder of the Schiller Institute. We have proposed this already at the fall of the Soviet Union to connect the East and West, to have a Marshall Plan economic development for Eastern Europe, and then later the idea developed into what we call the Eurasian Land Bridge, is to connect Western Europe through Russia and the Middle East to China. This report we produced in 1996, at the time when the Chinese government adopted this project, and as a way of establishing both economic development and also a means to have a peaceful cooperation, which is one of the most interesting aspects of the Belt and Road project. China says this is a peace project, which is true because this surpasses all geopolitics. Geopolitics is a zero-sum game, is that you have to undermine your neighbors, that there is a fight between the big powers for domination. Now, this philosophy is the imperialist philosophy, where it says, putting one neighbor against the other neighbor, that if a nation becomes rich, some other nation becomes poor. That's geopolitics, and this is not really good for the human race. What the Chinese are proposing and what we have been proposing is what is called the win-win prospect of relations among nations. Everybody wins from economic development and economic cooperation. And therefore, last year I was happy to work with some of my colleagues to produce this report, which we called Extending the Silk Road to West Asia and Africa, which is now Africa is becoming one of the most important partners, economic partners for China. And China is investing enormously into Africa's infrastructure because, people say Africa is rich. It's true. There is enormous natural wealth. There is also human wealth, population. But you cannot consider that wealth before you have what we call an economic platform. You need infrastructure. You need power, water, and transport, and scientific research, and healthcare, of course, and education to make that wealth become true. Because as long as it's in the ground, it doesn't mean anything. And this is the importance of China's initiative, is starting by building infrastructure. You need infrastructure first. You build a platform, and on that platform, you utilize the resources of the nation, whether it's natural resources or human resources. And that has almost nothing to do with money generally, which people think economy is about. Economy is not about money. Mr. Lyndon LaRouche has developed the true scientific thinking about the economy, which is called physical economy, is how we human beings can utilize our God-given creative powers to understand the laws and the physical laws of the universe and utilize them for our benefit. It's in a certain way, it's very close to the idea of what we have in Islamic culture of the istikhlaf, that we human beings here on earth and in the universe, we are here for a purpose. We have to develop earth. We have to replenish it. We have to increase our human race, but also to develop the resources of the land and create beautiful gardens everywhere. That's the true meaning of economy, and this is also one of the bases looking at economy. This is what made Germany a developed country. This is what made the United States originally an advanced country. So it's not simply raw materials, natural resources which make a great economy. It's the level of education and productivity of society and the availability of infrastructure in that society which makes it wealthy. So the Belt and Road represents also a new way of thinking about economy. Yes, China has enormous financial resources, but these financial resources are being used to develop something physical. You don't take the money and invest it in the stock market and making more money. That's the wrong way of looking at the economy. We use money as a political tool. We can create money, but where we use the money, that's the real issue. And China is using the $3 trillion surplus it has into developing physical infrastructure, scientific research in China, but now even abroad. They are building a space program. One of the most fascinating space programs in the world is now being developed by China. China will come out into space, and nations who want to have a future in space, they have to collaborate with China. And it's these kind of things which the Belt and Road represent, which is much, much beyond a trade route to transfer goods from A to B. It's a complete revolution in relations among nations. It's a revolution in the way people look at economics and the human society's relationship to nature generally.
Let's get to a very important question. How does the Middle Eastern countries perceive China's Belt and Road Initiative?
I think generally there's an enormous openness, of course, to China's Belt and Road Initiative. But unfortunately, because of the political and military instability in the region, this has not been a big issue for nations to work in. But now we see important developments. I mean, in the middle of one of the worst crises I can consider in the whole region in 2014, 2015 until now has been, we had simultaneous wars in Iraq and Syria and Yemen, which is, it sounds completely absurd reasons to have these wars, but it's a reality there. But in the middle of that reality, the president of China in January 2016, he came to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iran. And it's very interesting that they chose these three countries because these three countries, they look like they are on different sides of the war. And he presented this idea of working together on the Belt and Road, and that China will do its best to help these nations join this project and also build railways, water projects, nuclear power for all nations in the region without any differentiation. And this has opened the eyes of people. I mean, Egypt has been building a new Suez Canal. They are developing the whole Suez Canal industrial zone because they know that this is very interesting for the Chinese. The Iranians have the first train arrived from China to Tehran last year in May. Saudi Arabia has massive economic deals with China. Syria, who are still in a war, they have announced that they want to work with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. They want the Silk Road to be extended to Syria and benefit from China's national development programs to rebuild the country. and so on and so forth. And we also we have also people in Yemen who are in the middle of this terrible war. They are talking about connecting to the Silk Road and benefiting from the economic ideas and the model which China has presented. So after an initial skepticism about China's intentions, that skepticism is gone because China has shown a great goodwill and readiness to work in some of the worst conditions with nations. Other countries would choose just to stay away from these areas where there are conflicts, but China has been very open to work even in conflict zones because they realize that this is important for peace. Now, in 2002, Mr. LaRouche, who is the founder of our movement, he was in Abu Dhabi in 2002 in May, and what he presented in the Zain Center in Abu Dhabi is the idea that what is called the Middle East is the crossroads of the continents. If you look at the region we have in Southwest Asia, it's right in between three continents. It's located on the main trade routes of the world, in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. We have 2/3 of the world fossil fuels reserves in this region. We have enormous, well-educated population. So we have all the potential to develop into industrial economies, into a world-class economic. If we get rid of this idea of geopolitics, pitting one nation against the other, which is also part of the old imperial order, which says, you know, Shia and Sunni, we can use them to split these countries, to utilize them, to fight each other. And the only thing they will do is they would buy weapons from us. And they will use the oil money for that, or the oil money will be invested in banks and financial institutions in the West. So this has been the norm, but now China is coming in and saying, look, you can't continue like this. Everybody will be destroyed. What you have to do is to learn from our experience, and you nations got to work together to make this project work, but also to develop your own nations. And I think the message has gone through, and many countries in the region already now, they are working with China in many different ways for development of infrastructure, whether now or in the future. But the work is going on, and we are preparing a new version of our report where we will report on the recent developments. And an enormous amount of work has been done in spite of the wars we have, like in Iran, in Turkey, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia. There are lots of projects being built, but these are, of course, you don't see them in the news. The news reports is all about the terrible wars and the crises we have in the region. So for Southwest Asia, the so-called Middle East, this is a wonderful opportunity to have economic development, but also to establish peace among the nations, because that will make nations dependent on each other for their own development and survival into the future.
Mr. Askary, how will those Middle Eastern countries, or as you refer them by as Southwest Asian countries, benefit from the Belt and Road Initiative? And what can they do to profit from this Chinese project?
Well, what you need to do, I mean, like you have different kinds of nations, because we have nations that have natural resources, but they are underutilized. And we have an educated population. What we can do, we cannot build the infrastructure. Unfortunately, the countries in the Middle East are not capable themselves. They don't have the technology to build the infrastructure necessary to utilize our natural and human resources. So we would need China's assistance, and China is generous by providing the credit for these projects very cheap. As we have seen in other cases, like in Pakistan, we have interesting the China-Pakistan economic corridor. China is generously providing the financing, which is one of the big problems, but also it's providing the technology and know-how for building these projects. And that's the first step for these countries, to utilize China's openness to share both its financial resources but also its technological resources to build the basic infrastructure. And then when you build the infrastructure and you have enough power, water, transport, and skilled labor, then you can, it's become a self-generating process. We have very intelligent engineers, scientists, young people who would then take this on their own, and the governments, they have to plan on continuing the development of the basic economic infrastructure and the population capabilities to use the natural resources we have to create higher value. For example, one of the issues we have been discussing with countries in the region is that rather than selling raw oil for 50 or 60 or even $100 a barrel, if you build a chemical industry, petrochemical industry, and you produce plastics, for example, which are now everywhere in the world, wherever you go, even cars are produced from plastics, great parts of the cars. Any hospital you go, it's all plastics, furniture, building material. Now, if you take 1 barrel of oil and put it into a petrochemical plant and then produce plastics, for example, and other chemicals like paints, machine oils, all kinds of things, the value of each barrel will be maybe 5-6 times more than selling it as raw material. But unfortunately, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the know-how to build petrochemical plants and build a massive plastics industry to export to the rest of the world. So if we build enough infrastructure and industrial capabilities, we will no longer be selling raw oil and raw gas or raw phosphate to the rest of the world. We will be selling very high value products to the rest of the world, which will augment our capabilities and our economy. The income will increase enormously. So this is one of the benefits we have from building the Belt and Road, or getting China's assistance in building the basic infrastructure we have in the so-called Middle East.
Okay, let's get to the last question. How do you see the future of the Belt and Road project in the Middle East?
Well, a lot will depend on the direction of policies in the world, because as you know, Southwest Asia or the Middle East is it's like the center of world conflicts for geographical reasons and also because of the petroleum wealth. There are many international powers who have seen as their interest to dominate this region. So a lot of what will happen here will depend on what direction, especially the U.S. policy will take towards China, towards Russia, and other regional countries, like Iran, for example. A lot will depend on what happens with the Palestinian issue and the rights of the Palestinian people. So these are very key issues, but that does not mean that we stop working and waiting for somebody from outside to come and, solve the situation. The nations of the region, they have to themselves take each one for individually, but also as a collective force, if possible, but that's difficult to bring all these nations together. But each nation have to work out a plan for its future development, 10, 15, 20, 30 years forward, and work on the means to do it. And now we have China is ready to help in that sense. So we have to work with China. We need to work with other countries and explain for them, this is what we want to do in our country. This is what we want to do in this region. If you want, you can help in that. But we are not be part of geopolitical games anymore. And that's where the thing will, will break or go on. It's the will of the people on this region and the leadership to work to build a better future for their populations. And I think that's a key issue. What we have in West Asia and in Africa generally, this would be the region with the greatest population growth on Earth. There will be 1.9 billion new human beings born in these regions, in West Asia and in Africa. You already have young populations. Many of them have relatively good education. So you got to look at this as a great source of wealth into the future, but you need to give them the tools. You need to give them the education and inspire them with the vision of a future where people will live in peace, but they will be productive nations. Our young people will be scientists, will be engineers, will be musicians. There will be astronauts who might, go out into space and explore the beautiful universe God has created for us. And it's in the level of ideas actually where things will tend to function. We need visions, we need ideas, and at the same time we need real work on the ground.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein Askary, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Zain Khan. I'm very happy to be with you this time.
This was Hussein Askary, the Southwest Asia coordinator for the Schiller Institute and also the chairman of the Swedish European Labour Party. We were discussing how China's Belt and Road Initiative benefits the Middle East. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.